Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio, so today I'm going to be taking a closer look at a card which I quite like. It's Tauros GX from the new Pokémon Sun and Moon trading card game expansion. Now, I've said on a bunch of videos here that I really like Tauros because you can Ninja Boy into him from a damaged basic Pokémon and then use a GX attack to do 3 times as much damage as will now be on Tauros after the Ninja Boy. But I don't think I've been giving him enough credit, so I think it's time to look at how he could use in a deck by himself. And the way I think, and I've seen a bunch of people talking about using Tauros, I think the best idea here is Tauros, Garbodor, Hammers. Now, looking at the basics of the deck, we've got Garbodor. Garbodor's been around for a while. When you attach a tool to him, usually Floatstone because of his high retreat cost, you can block abilities, and that's a big thing at the moment. You can block abilities from Volcanion EX, from Greninja Break, from Decidueye, and from Vileplume, if you can get a Floatstone on Trubbish or Garbodor before Vileplume comes out. Because as soon as Vileplume comes out, then Vileplume's ability comes in, stopping you playing item cards like tools to attach to Garbodor. But if you get the tool on Garbodor first, then when your opponent gets Vileplume out, it does nothing. And then we've got Tauros. Now, standardly, Tauros, double colourless energy, 60 damage, it's not particularly great. Although, turn 1, every turn, 60 damage, 1 energy attachment, it's not terrible, but we were doing 60 for 1 energy back when we were using Donphan Prime, and by we I mean me, there wasn't that many people playing Donphan. The other attacks Tauros has are Rage, 20 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on him, and the aforementioned GX attack. Now, here's the problem with Tauros. Unless you're content doing 60 damage per turn, your damage output is entirely controlled by how much damage your opponent does. Although if they don't do damage, you can just sit there poking for 60 damage every turn. Now, clearly here, Fighting Fury Belt is going to be huge, puts Tauros up to 220 HP, making both of his attacks much better, because of course the more HP you've got, the more damage you can have on you, and hence the more damage you can do. And of course it's always nice to just do an extra 10 damage. And that's the basics here. You sit down behind Garbodor, using Tauros to attack, and either your opponent doesn't hit you and you poke them for 60, or they do hit you and you do more back to them than they did to you. Generally with the first attack, Rage, but maybe Mad Bull GX once per game. I say maybe, you're probably going to, you're going to want to use it every game. Now, the other thing you do here is energy denial. You want to stop your opponent being able to do enough damage to KO you, and that's really the plan here. Use a combination of Garbodor and energy denial cards so that your opponent never gets a Pokemon that can one-hit KO Tauros. While they're not one-hit KOing Tauros, you get to go ahead and do more damage to them than they've done to you. You could even use a card like Max Potion here to reset Tauros if he's getting close to being KO'd. Although the closer he gets to being KO'd, the more damage you're doing, so Max Potion might not be the best plan, but maybe 1 or 2 it will have situational uses. As a side note here, before I forget, because you're so reliant on double colourless energy here, make sure you're playing Special Charge to recover it. So, what energy denial do we have? We've got Crushing Hammer, flip a coin if heads, discard any energy from your opponent's side of the field. We've got Enhanced Hammer, automatic discard, but only of a special energy. And we've got Team Flare Grunt, automatic discard, but only from your opponent's active. You should also be considering playing Red Card here to slow your opponent down, give them fewer cards in hand. It does the same thing really as the energy denial cards, in that you are trying to make sure your opponent doesn't have the resources to be able to KO Tauros. And then all the damage they do, you do back to them, but more. As a side note, if you're using Red Card, Judge of course does the same thing, but can be reused with Versus Seeker. And that's basically the deck. Slow them down with hammers, stop the abilities of Garbodor, and just poke with Tauros and then hit them big when they hit you. So the real question that we need to ask here is, what Pokemon can one-hit KO Tauros? Now, I'm not going to give you, I don't think, an exhaustive list, and certainly as more cards are revealed, more will be able to one-hit KO him. But I'm going to give you some common examples. Firstly, Persimmon. Now, if we're assuming that Tauros has a Fighting Fury belt attached, and most of the time he will, if you're playing Tauros as a deck, you're gonna be playing 4 Fighting Fury belt, maybe even an Eco Arm or 2 to reuse them. So if you're assuming he's got a Fighting Fury belt, that means he's got 220 HP. Which means Persimmon needs to do 110 damage to get a one-hit KO with the weakness. 3 Persimmon on the bench, 100 damage, plus a Fighting Fury belt on the Persimmon means that you're doing 110. You are not struggling, assuming you don't have any Persimmon prized, of course, you are really not struggling to get a one-hit KO on Tauros. And that's a little bit of a problem, even when they've got a Fighting Fury belt on them. They are not really struggling to get a one-hit KO. That is a slight problem here. But we've got plenty of options to try and take down this Persimmon. Firstly, we've got Lugia EX, decent attack for a double colourless energy, like we're playing anyway. And Lugia's got a pretty nice HP here. Oh yeah, and he's got a resistance to fighting. So actually here, the Ancient Origins Lugia, with a Fighting Fury bout, 210 HP, plus a resistance to fighting, it's going to take a while for Persimmon to KO. Aero Ball, 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. Assuming they've both got a double colourless, that's 80 damage. Lugia is going to be comfortably 2-hit KOing Persimmon, and Persimmon is going to be struggling to KO Lugia. And if you're playing a max potion here, I really worry about Persimmon getting the KO. The other thing you could do here is you could play a Mew along with the Lugia. Now you can copy Lugia's attacks using Mew, but now you're hitting Persimmon for weakness. You could, I suppose, also just copy Tauros' attack as well, but if Persimmon's got a Fighting Fury bout, you're only doing 120 with weakness, which won't be enough to get the KO. Oh dear. Never mind. So Persimmon with things like Lugia is not going to be a huge problem. We've got Volcanion. Now Volcanion EX has the Steam Up ability. If they use 3 Steam Ups and then use the attack of Volcanion EX, they are now hitting for 220 damage, which will KO a belted Tauros. Or with 4 Steam Ups, a non-EX Volcanion with free energy could get a KO on a belted Tauros. But that means they've got to have free energy on the Volcanion and they've got to use the ability. Well, Garbodor takes away the ability, Hammers take away the energy, so Garbodor Hammers should be neutralizing Volcanion. Now the maths on this one gets a little bit annoying, but Zygarde EX. Now without a belt, Zygarde can actually get the KO on Tauros. So, Zygarde's first attack, 40 damage, assuming there's a stadium in play, which there's going to be. Then you add a strong energy, now you're doing 60 damage, plus a Fighting Fury belt, 70 damage, and if they play Professor Kukui as their supporter for the turn, 90 damage, plus the weakness, 180. Although a belt will save you there. Now for 2 energy, they can hit 220, if there's a Fighting Fury belt and either 2 strong energy or 1 strong energy plus a Professor Kukui. But now we're basically saying, if you're belted, Zygarde is really relying on strong energy to get KOs here. Well, that's alright, because Enhanced Hammer says hello. Even if they're using fighting and attaching a strong later, that puts real pressure on them to get a Kukui, and you can still play something like Crushing Hammer anyway. And let's not forget here, Zygarde's weak to grass. Lurantis and Decidueye look like 2 of the best cards from Sun and Moon. Weakness to grass is really not a weakness you want right now. So Zygarde might not even see that much play. Now, Greninja, again, can get a one-hit KO on a belted Tauros. It's a little bit awkward. What you need is a giant water shuriken from a Greninja break, then a retreat into a second giant water shuriken from a second Greninja break, plus Moonlight Slash returning the energy to your hand, plus Professor Kukui, means that you will do 220 damage. 60 plus 60 plus 80 plus 20. Now, given that they're doing it for one energy, hammers will do nothing, but of course, if you get a Garbodor out, then they're not going to be able to play with the ability, and that's going to be a problem for them. I mean, here you could even use the new Giratina promo, whose ability turns off the abilities of break Pokemon. But Giratina here really is just a little bit awkward. Garbodor does seem like the better option. One more example I'll give you, Mega Rayquaza. If they've got a Skyfield with 8 bench Pokemon, they are hitting for 240. But they're really reliant on double colourless energy, and they're really reliant on Skyfield. And they're reliant on cards like Shaymin and Hooper and Dragonite to recover when you get rid of their Skyfield. So a combination of Garbodor plus hammers plus probably playing your own stadium here, which could even be something like Parallel City to put their bench very low, or even something like Skyfield to turn off the abilities of all those basic Pokemon. And let's not forget the Skyfield will work against Volcanion EX as well. And we're looking like Rayquaza is very, very manageable. I suppose I need to give a shout out to my boy Incineroar, whose GX attack does 200 plus burn, and burn will then immediately do 20 after the turn ends, which is basically a one-hit KO, but it's a free energy attack. Hammers will do fine here. So here's my point. If made correctly, you can basically, using Garbodor and hammers, and maybe Silent Lab here as well, you can make it so that all of these decks that should be able to one-hit KO Tauros don't one-hit KO Tauros. And now we can just get back to using double colourless energy, and off we go. Now, if you're really reliant on double colourless energy, your opponent can play Enhanced Hammer. That's a bit sad. Your opponent can use Jirachi. But Jirachi's not a huge problem. Just don't attach for a turn. If you don't attach, they can't discard it and gain immunity, and as soon as they don't have immunity, you KO. And, you know, Giratina could be a problem, but then you can just play a single Pokemon Ranger, and then you can attach a double colourless, and you've got 100 damage on you, which means you're going to do a fair bit back to the old Giratina. This could be a very, very powerful deck. Now, I've gone through a lot of the options you could use as we've gone through this video. Fates Collide Mew for Persimmon, Lugia, although I don't think Lugia is so much another option as an integral part of the deck here. I think he needs to be played. Maybe you play Silent Lab here to turn off those abilities. Maybe use Red Card or Judge. I've gone through these options as we've gone through. Now, there are some other builds of Tauros which I've seen floating around that I've seen mooted by some people. I'm not going to go into great detail about them here. I think Garbodor Hammers is the way to go. But before we end here, I thought it might be nice to just have a quick look at them. Serena. You play it with Forest of Giant Plants and Serena, and of course Devolution Spray. Evolve as many Serena as you can, get rid of cards from your opponent's hand while you just do your thing with Tauros. The problem is here, if you don't hit the right cards out of their hand, or if they top deck the right cards or whatever, then they might be able to get a one-hit KO. And if they get a one-hit KO, that kind of defeats the whole point of Tauros. I'm not a huge fan of this. The other thing I've seen mooted is Plume Box. This is where you use Vileplume and a whole bunch of basic attackers, maybe things like Jolteon, Glaceon, etc. Using Rainbow Energy so you can power up whichever Pokemon you like. Using Ninja Boy so you can switch between Pokemon. Could be a fun option here. I think Plume Box, and I know some people have had limited success with it, But the thing I see about Plume Box is sometimes people win tournaments with it. You don't see the same person winning tournament after tournament like you do see people winning tournament after tournament with Yveltal. Plume Box doesn't always work, and when it doesn't, it's a terrible deck. I am a fan of Tauros with Garbodor and with Hammers. And the more I started thinking about this deck, the more I started thinking I loved it. Think about some common attackers at the moment. Somebody like a Tauros GX. The only way they're getting a one-hit KO here is if they can pile 5 grass energy onto a Tauros. And even that is 1 per game. Think about something like an Umbreon. Seems like a great attacker, but they're only doing 90 damage. Even with a Fighting Fury Bell over 2 turns, that's 200 damage. That is not going to get a KO on Tauros. There is a lot to like here, ladies and gentlemen. There is a lot to like. Now, we're pretty much out of time for talking about Tauros today, so you know the deal. There is a comment section. Say nice things, or say mean things, but say it in a nice way. You know the deal. Be nice. There are buttons to both like this video and subscribe to this channel. I'd very much like it if you use them both. Follow me on Twitter @TheWassy, and the most important thing as always, look after yourselves until next time. Now, a bunch of people have been pointing out that my 10-minute long videos don't have adverts in the middle. They don't at the moment. It might change in the future. Please don't hate me if it does. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.